You never expect your life to change in an instant. But it happens. 1 minute, you're on solid ground, and the next, the rug's been ripped out from under you. It started on a Thursday. A completely regular Thursday. I was supposed to meet Laura, my wife, at our friend's house for a game night. Laura was already there, and I had stayed late at work to finish a project. I remember driving over, feeling excited, thinking about how it'd be nice to spend time together, unwind with some friends. It had been a while since we had any real fun. I pulled into the driveway, noticed the lights on in the living room. Laughter was leaking out of the windows. I smiled. It was nice to hear her laugh, she hadn't done much of that lately. But as I got closer to the house, I noticed something strange. My friend Steve's car was there, but his wife's wasn't. And Laura's car wasn't parked out front either. I didn't think too much of it. Maybe they carpooled, maybe they parked somewhere else. People do that. As I walked in, the living room was empty. I stood there for a second, listening to the sounds of muffled conversation coming from down the hall. More laughter, light and carefree. It didn't sound like a big group, it sounded like 2 people. Just 2 voices. I called out, "Hey, guys?" But no one responded. A knot started to form in my stomach. I made my way down the hallway toward the back room, following the voices. The closer I got, the clearer it became. I knew that laugh. It was Laura. And Steve. My heart raced, a weird mixture of confusion and panic flooding my chest. I reached the door and paused for a second, just listening. I heard Steve say something low, followed by more of Laura's laughter, too familiar, too intimate. I pushed the door open. There they were, sitting on the couch, way too close for it to be casual. Laura's hand rested on Steve's knee, his fingers lightly brushing her arm. The way they snapped apart when they saw me, like 2 kids caught stealing, said everything I needed to know. They were sitting there, but the air between them was thick with something unsaid, something undeniable. Laura's face turned pale, eyes wide with shock. Steve jumped up, stammering something about a misunderstanding, but I couldn't hear a word. All I could focus on was how Laura had frozen, her hands still halfway in the air, as if she was trying to decide whether to explain or just bolt. I stood there for what felt like hours, but it was probably only seconds. It was one of those moments where your brain doesn't catch up with reality fast enough. I just kept staring at the space between them, the gap that wasn't nearly big enough. My chest tightened, like someone had wrapped a belt around my ribs and was pulling it tighter and tighter. "What the hell is this?" I finally asked, my voice sounding calmer than I felt. My head was spinning, but my body wouldn't move. I couldn't feel my legs, my arms, just that pounding in my chest. Steve started babbling again, trying to spin some story about how they were just talking, how nothing had happened. But he couldn't even look me in the eye. His words were all over the place, stammering like a kid caught sneaking out past curfew. And Laura, she didn't say a word. Not a single word. She just stared at me, her mouth slightly open, like she didn't know what to say. Or maybe she didn't think she had to. That's when it hit me, harder than any punch I'd ever taken. This wasn't just a one-off. This wasn't just some stupid, spur-of-the-moment thing. I could see it in their faces, in the way they reacted, like they'd been rehearsing this scene in their heads, dreading the moment I walked in on them. I felt like I had stepped into a movie, one of those cheap dramas where the husband walks in and everything falls apart. But this wasn't some fictional plot twist. This was my life. My wife. And my best friend. Without another word, I turned around and walked out of the room, out of the house. I didn't go far after I left Steve's house. I couldn't. My hands were shaking too much to drive, and my mind was racing so fast I could barely think straight. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me from spinning off the planet. My phone buzzed in my pocket, once, twice, 3 times, but I didn't even look at it. I knew it was either Laura or Steve, trying to do damage control. I couldn't deal with either of them. After what felt like hours, I forced myself to start the car and drove home. I didn't know what else to do. I just needed to be somewhere familiar, somewhere that didn't make me feel like I was losing my mind. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark, quiet, like nothing had changed. But everything had. Walking into the house felt wrong, like I didn't belong there anymore. The place that had always been my safe zone, the place where we raised our kids, celebrated birthdays, argued over stupid things, now felt like a stranger's house. I dropped my keys on the table and headed straight for the kitchen. I wasn't hungry, but I needed to do something with my hands. I opened the fridge, grabbed a beer, and just stood there, staring at the rows of condiments like they had answers. I couldn't wrap my head around it. Laura and Steve? The thought was ridiculous. They'd known each other for years, sure, but it was never like that. Or was it? I thought back to all the times we'd hung out, the barbecues, the holidays, the way she always laughed a little too hard at his jokes. It all seemed innocent enough then, but now I wasn't so sure. Maybe I'd missed something. Maybe I'd been missing it for a long time. I sat down at the kitchen table, the cold bottle sweating in my hand, and started to go over everything in my head. When had it started? Was it new, or had it been going on for months? Years, even? The more I thought about it, the more paranoid I became. Every late night she worked, every time she went out with friends, every time she stayed behind at one of Steve's cookouts to help clean up, it all started to feel like pieces of a puzzle I never even knew I was solving. I wanted to ask her. I wanted to storm into the bedroom, wake her up, and demand she tell me the truth. But then I realized something: I didn't even know where she was. She wasn't home. I hadn't noticed it when I walked in, too caught up in my own head to pay attention, but her car wasn't in the driveway. Where the hell was she? My phone buzzed again, snapping me out of my thoughts. This time I looked at it. 2 missed calls from Steve, 5 from Laura. I swiped away the notifications and opened my messages. There was a text from her, sent about an hour after I left Steve's place. Can we talk? Please don't do anything drastic. It's not what you think. Not what I think. I couldn't even begin to unpack that. How could it not be what I think? I'd seen it. I'd seen the way she touched him, the way they looked at each other. There was no misunderstanding here. I put the phone down without replying and went back to staring at the beer in my hand. After a while, I couldn't take the silence anymore. I needed to do something, anything to distract myself. I got up, went into the living room, and turned on the TV. I don't even remember what was on. It was just noise, something to drown out the thoughts racing through my head. But even that didn't work. My eyes kept drifting over to the couch, where she'd sit every night, her legs tucked under her, reading or watching her shows while I sat next to her. It felt like a lie now, all of it. I grabbed my phone again, scrolled through the missed calls and texts, then went to Steve's contact. My finger hovered over the call button for a second before I backed out. I wasn't ready to talk to him. Not yet. I didn't want to hear his pathetic excuses or his bullshit apology. What was he going to say? Sorry I got too close to your wife? There was no excuse for what I saw, and there was no fixing it with words. But I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I went back to his house. By the time I pulled up in front of Steve's place again, it was after midnight. The house was dark, just like mine had been, but his car was still in the driveway. Laura's wasn't there. I got out of the car and stood in the street for a minute, trying to figure out what the hell I was even doing there. What was my plan? Was I going to confront him now, in the middle of the night? Kick down the door and demand answers? I started walking up the driveway before I had a chance to change my mind. My heart was pounding in my ears as I made my way around the side of the house, toward the back. Steve had this small backyard patio where we used to hang out, drink beers, talk about the kids, sports, whatever. It had always been a place of relaxation, a place where I felt at ease. But now, standing there in the dark, it felt different. I stepped closer, and that's when I saw them. They were outside, sitting on the patio furniture, but it wasn't Steve and Laura. It was Steve and someone else. A woman. At first, I thought it might be one of his neighbors or someone from the group, but as I got closer, I recognized her. It was Kelly, his ex-wife. They were sitting together, talking in low voices, and then she reached out and touched his arm, the same way Laura had earlier. My blood ran cold. Steve had cheated on Kelly years ago, that's why they got divorced. I remember her telling me about it over drinks one night when we'd all gone out as a group. She'd been heartbroken, blindsided, just like I was now. And yet here she was, sitting with him, smiling, like none of that had ever happened. I didn't know what to do. Should I go up to them, demand an explanation? Should I just turn around and leave before they saw me? My mind was racing, but my feet were glued to the ground. I couldn't move. I stood there, hidden in the shadows, watching them like some kind of creepy voyeur, waiting for something to happen. And then it did. Kelly leaned in, whispered something in Steve's ear, and they both started laughing. That same, carefree laughter I'd heard earlier when it was just him and Laura. My stomach churned. How many people had he done this to? How many lives had he wrecked with that stupid smile of his? And how the hell had I let it happen to me? I couldn't stand it any longer. I turned and walked back to my car, my head spinning. I didn't care what they were saying or doing. It didn't matter. What mattered was Laura. I needed to talk to her. I needed to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. When I got home, the house was still dark, still silent. Her car was in the driveway now. She was back. I stood at the front door for a long time, staring at the doorknob, trying to calm myself down. This was it. The moment I had to confront her. I needed to know what was going on. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door and stepped inside. The door creaked open, and there she was. Laura was sitting at the kitchen table, her head down, hands wrapped around a coffee mug. She didn't look up when I walked in. The silence was thick, like it was pushing me back, daring me to turn around and leave. But I couldn't. Not anymore. I stood there, just staring at her, my heart pounding like a hammer in my chest. My legs felt heavy, like they didn't belong to me anymore, but I forced myself to move. I dropped my keys on the counter louder than I meant to, and she finally looked up. Her eyes were red, swollen, like she'd been crying, but I didn't care. I couldn't care. Not after what I'd seen. Where were you? My voice came out rougher than I expected, a mix of anger and something else I couldn't place. Hurt? Betrayal? I didn't even know what I was feeling anymore. She didn't answer right away. Just stared at me like she was waiting for something, maybe hoping I wouldn't press it, that I'd just let it slide. But I wasn't about to let anything slide tonight. Where the hell were you, Laura? I repeated, louder this time. I wasn't going to let her dance around it. I was at Steve's, she finally muttered, barely above a whisper. She took a shaky breath and looked away, like she couldn't meet my eyes. I wanted to laugh at the irony of it. Yeah, I know. I was there, remember? That got her attention. Her head snapped up, eyes wide with panic. You what? I saw you, Laura. I saw you with him. So don't even try to play dumb. The words came out harsher than I expected, but I couldn't hold back. The floodgates had opened, and everything I'd been holding inside all night came rushing out. She stared at me for a moment, her face pale, like the blood had drained out of her body. Then, she pushed her chair back and stood up, rubbing her temples like she was trying to make sense of everything. Okay, it's not what you think. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Not what I think. I scoffed, stepping closer. My hands were clenched into fists at my sides, nails digging into my palms. You were sitting there, with your hand on him, laughing. You think I'm blind, Laura? She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and looked at me, her eyes filled with something that almost looked like pity. It's not what you think, Jake. It wasn't. There's nothing going on between us. I swear. My blood boiled. How could she stand there and lie like that, right to my face? I wasn't stupid. I'd seen the way she looked at him. I knew what was going on. You really expect me to believe that? After what I saw? She hesitated for a moment, then stepped toward me, her voice softer now. Jake, I need you to listen to me, okay? Just hear me out. I shook my head. No, I'm done listening. You had plenty of chances to talk to me. Now, it's too late for that. She let out a shaky breath and rubbed her eyes. Steve and we've just been talking. That's it. I promise. We've both been going through some things, and... Cut the bullshit, Laura, I snapped, stepping closer. Just tell me the truth. You owe me that much. I am telling you the truth, she shot back, her voice rising. Nothing's happened, okay? Yes, we've gotten close, but I swear to God, Jake, I haven't done anything. I haven't. Don't lie to me. I yelled, slamming my fist on the table. I saw it, Laura. I saw the way you touched him. The way you laughed with him, like I wasn't even part of the equation anymore. She flinched at the sound of my fist hitting the table but didn't back down. Her face was flushed now, the red creeping up her neck as her eyes filled with tears again. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she whispered, almost to herself. I clenched my jaw, every muscle in my body tensing as I tried to hold myself together. So what was it supposed to be, huh? You and Steve just having your little private moments while I sit here, playing the idiot? She finally looked me in the eye, her voice trembling but firm. It's not like that. I swear, it's not. Then what the hell is it? I demanded, stepping closer until I was inches from her. Explain it to me, Laura. Because from where I'm standing, it sure as hell looks like you're screwing around with my best friend behind my back. She wiped at her eyes, her hands shaking, and took a deep breath. We've been talking, Jake. That's it. I've been, God, I don't even know how to explain it. It's like I've been lost, okay? I've been feeling so disconnected from everything. From you, from life, from. And that's supposed to make this okay? I interrupted, my voice rising again. You feeling disconnected means you get to cozy up with Steve behind my back? How long, Laura? How long have you been doing this? She opened her mouth to say something but then stopped, biting her lip like she was trying to find the right words. A few months, she finally admitted, her voice barely audible. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Months. This wasn't some recent thing, something that just happened. It had been going on right under my nose for months. Jesus Christ, I muttered, stepping back. Months? And you never thought to tell me? You never thought that maybe I deserved to know? I didn't know how to tell you, she shot back, her voice cracking. It wasn't supposed to be like this, Jake. I didn't mean for it to happen. Oh, you didn't mean for it to happen? I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Well, that makes everything better, doesn't it? That makes it all okay. Jake, please, just listen to me. She reached out for my arm, but I pulled away before she could touch me. I'm sorry, okay? I'm so sorry. I know I've screwed up. I know I've hurt you. But I never cheated on you. Not physically. I swear. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. Was that supposed to make me feel better? That it hadn't gotten physical? Like somehow that made it less of a betrayal? So, what? You expect me to just, what? Forgive you? Pretend like this never happened? I could hear my voice shaking with rage, but I didn't care anymore. I don't know, she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks now. I don't know what I expect. I didn't want to lose you, Jake. I don't want to lose our life together. Well, guess what, Laura, I said coldly. You already did. She collapsed into the chair, her hands covering her face as sobs racked her body. For a brief second, I felt a pang of something, pity, maybe? Sympathy? I didn't know. But it was gone just as quickly as it came. I couldn't feel sorry for her. Not after everything she'd done. You and Steve, I muttered, shaking my head. Of all people. It wasn't supposed to happen, she mumbled through her sobs. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I felt like laughing again. But it did. Didn't it? She didn't respond. Just sat there, crying into her hands like some wounded animal. I stood there for a few more seconds, my fist still clenched at my sides, before I turned and walked out of the kitchen. I couldn't be around her anymore. Not right now. I needed to think. I needed to breathe. I needed to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. I slammed the bedroom door behind me and stood there for a moment, my back pressed against it. My mind was racing, bouncing between memories of our life together and the image of Laura with Steve. The betrayal was like a weight on my chest, pressing down harder with each breath. I couldn't just let this slide. No, that wasn't even an option. She'd been playing me for months, sneaking around behind my back, and now she thought some tears and a half-assed apology were going to fix things? No chance. The worst part wasn't even Steve, it was her. She'd been lying to my face every day. Every time we sat down for dinner, every night we lay in bed together, she knew what she was doing, and she chose to keep doing it. The more I thought about it, the more I could feel the rage building up, my pulse quickening with every second. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this without consequences. I had to hit her where it hurt. I grabbed my phone off the dresser and scrolled through my contacts until I found Tom's number. Tom was my best friend from work, and if there was anyone I could trust to have my back in this, it was him. He picked up on the second ring. Jake? What's up, man? It's late. I need your help, I said, my voice low but firm. And I need you to keep this between us. There was a pause on the other end. Tom knew me well enough to recognize when something serious was going on. All right, man. What's going on? Laura's been screwing around with Steve. I found out tonight. There was a sharp intake of breath, and then silence. Tom knew Steve, too. He was in our circle of friends, or at least he used to be. But Tom was smart enough not to say anything just yet. He was waiting for me to explain more. I need to get out of here for a while. But before I go, I'm going to make sure she feels it. I need a favor. Anything, man. Just tell me what you need. I need you to help me get my stuff out of the house tomorrow while she's at work. I don't want her to see it coming. I want to be gone before she has a chance to stop me. Got it, Tom said without hesitation. I'll be there. You need me to bring anything? Nah, just yourself and your truck. I've got everything planned out. I'm taking everything that matters, she can have the rest. Tom sighed. I'm sorry, Jake. I can't believe she did that. You deserve better than this. I didn't say anything. I didn't need sympathy or validation right now. I needed action. We made plans to meet up the next morning, and I hung up. I stared at the bedroom for a few more minutes, thinking about all the things we'd shared in this house, our kids' first steps, late-night conversations, quiet mornings where we didn't even need to talk because we were comfortable in the silence. All of it was tainted now. This house, this life I'd built with her, it was nothing but a lie. I couldn't sleep, so I started packing. I moved quietly, careful not to wake her as I pulled suitcases from the closet and began filling them with clothes, personal items, things that mattered to me. I left all the stuff that didn't let her have the furniture, the dishes, the things we bought together. It didn't mean anything to me anymore. The only thing I wanted was to make sure she felt what I was feeling, that she understood just how much she had destroyed. As I packed, I started planning my next move. It wasn't enough to just leave. That would be too easy for her. No, I had to leave a mark, something she'd never forget. By the time the sun was creeping through the blinds, I was ready. I grabbed the last suitcase and stood at the door for a second, looking back at the room that had been ours for so many years. Laura was still asleep, her face turned toward the wall. I didn't feel anything looking at her. Not anymore. I walked out and closed the door softly behind me. It was time to set things in motion. Tom showed up right on time, as usual. We loaded everything into his truck without saying much, the silence between us heavy with the unspoken weight of what was happening. When we finished, I handed him a small envelope. "What's this?" he asked, looking at it curiously. Inside are the names and addresses of her parents, her sister, and a few of her closest friends. "I want you to drop these off for me." Tom frowned, opening the envelope to peek inside. His eyes widened when he saw what was in there: copies of texts between Laura and Steve, pictures of them together that I'd managed to find on her phone, proof of their betrayal. I'd spent the last few hours collecting everything I could, making sure there was no room for excuses or denials. "Are you sure about this?" Tom asked, his voice hesitant. "Damn right I'm sure. They deserve to know what kind of person she really is. I'm not just going to disappear and let her play the victim." Tom nodded, though he still looked uneasy. "All right, man. I'll take care of it." "And one more thing," I said, pulling out another envelope. "This one goes to her HR department at work. Steve works there, too, and I want them to know exactly what's been going on. I'm not letting them get away with this." Tom took the envelope, his face unreadable, but he didn't argue. He knew me well enough to know that when I made up my mind about something, there was no point trying to talk me out of it. After everything was loaded up, I stood in the driveway for a second, just looking at the house. The place that was supposed to be our forever home. I felt a strange sense of satisfaction, knowing that by the time Laura came back tonight, everything would be gone. I wouldn't be there to listen to her excuses or watch her fake more tears. I'd be long gone, and she'd be left to deal with the mess she'd created. "I'm going to my mom's for a while," I told Tom, "just until I figure out my next move." "You'll let me know when you've dropped everything off?" "Yeah," Tom said, slapping me on the shoulder. "I've got your back, man. Always." With that, we drove off. I didn't even look in the rearview mirror. When I got to my mom's, I explained everything. Well, not everything. I didn't tell her about the stuff I'd given to Tom. That part was mine to carry. But she understood. Moms always do. She didn't ask questions, didn't press for details. She just hugged me and told me I could stay as long as I needed. I spent the next few days in a strange kind of limbo, half waiting for Laura to call, half hoping she wouldn't. But she didn't. Not for days. I knew she was trying to figure out what to say, how to fix this, but there was no fixing it. The damage was done. Then, finally, the call came. It was late, just past 11 p.m. I was sitting in my mom's living room, flipping through channels without really watching anything. My phone buzzed on the table, and I knew who it was before I even looked. I let it ring a couple of times before answering. "Jake," her voice came through, quiet and shaky. "Can we talk?" I didn't say anything for a moment, just let her sit there in the silence. I wanted her to feel what I'd felt: abandoned, lost, like the world she knew had crumbled beneath her feet. "Where the hell are you?" she asked, her voice breaking. "You can't just leave like this." "I did," I said, my voice cold. "And I'm not coming back." She started crying, but it didn't do anything for me. Not anymore. She'd had months to be honest with me, to come clean, but she hadn't. Now she was dealing with the consequences. "Jake, I'm sorry. Please, just come home so we can talk about this." "There's nothing left to talk about," I said flatly. "I know what you did, and I'm done." Her sobs grew louder, and I could hear her struggling to form words between the gasps. I don't know what to do without you. You should have thought about that before you started sneaking around with Steve." There was a long silence. Then, through her sobs, she whispered, "I'm so sorry." I didn't say anything. I just hung up. I had hung up on her, and after that, things went quiet. Too quiet. Laura didn't try to call again after that night, and I didn't hear from Steve either. There was no apology message, no long email where she tried to explain her betrayal. She must have known there was no fixing it this time. Maybe she was just biding her time, trying to figure out how to clean up the mess she'd made. Or maybe she was hoping I'd cool down and come crawling back. But that wasn't going to happen. I was done. Over the next few days, I got regular updates from Tom. He delivered the envelopes like I'd asked, each one to her friends, her parents, and her job. He said her parents had looked shocked when they opened the envelope and saw what was inside. I pictured her mom's face, reading the texts between Laura and Steve, the naked photos, all the evidence of their months of deception. Her mom had always thought Laura was perfect, her sweet, little girl who could do no wrong. Well, now she'd see the truth. It wasn't long before the fallout started. I'd heard through Tom that Laura had been called into HR at work. Apparently, things got messy when the truth came out. Steve, being the coward that he was, tried to downplay it, saying they were just good friends and that there was nothing inappropriate going on. But when HR saw the photos I'd sent, the texts where they talked about meeting up outside of work, about how much they wanted each other, there was no wriggling out of it. Steve got fired. Just like I planned. As for Laura, she got off a little easier. She still had her job, for now, but she'd been demoted. I figured that was enough. Let her deal with the whispers behind her back, the judgmental stares in the office every day. She'd have to walk into work knowing that everyone knew what she'd done. They wouldn't say it to her face, of course, but she'd feel it. That's what I wanted. I wanted her to feel that weight, that crushing pressure of knowing she couldn't escape from what she'd done. The job wasn't the important part. It was the shame. But still, none of it made me feel better. Not like I thought it would. The house was gone, Laura's reputation was ruined, Steve was out of a job, but it didn't bring me any satisfaction. I just felt empty. Angry, yeah, but mostly hollow. I kept going over everything in my head, replaying it all, wondering if there was something I could have done differently to prevent it. I hated that part, the wondering. Even though I knew it wasn't my fault, it was hard to stop my brain from picking everything apart. About a week after I left, Laura called again. I saw her name flash across my phone screen and thought about ignoring it. But something in me wanted to hear what she had to say, if she even had anything left to say at this point. I answered. What? Her voice was quiet, shaky. Can we please talk? In person this time. Why? Because, she hesitated. Because I don't want to leave things like this. I think things are exactly where they need to be, I said flatly. Jake, please. I need to talk to you. Face to face. I don't want us to end like this. Just, please. I didn't want to go, didn't want to sit across from her and hear her excuses again. But something inside me, a strange mixture of curiosity and finality, pushed me to agree. Maybe I needed to see her one last time to close the chapter on this mess. Fine. Tomorrow. At the house. The next day, I drove back to our home. It didn't feel like mine anymore, though. I hadn't been back since that morning I packed up everything, and as I pulled into the driveway, I felt like I was stepping into someone else's life. The lawn was unkempt, the curtains drawn, and the place had a heavy, abandoned feeling about it. I stood outside for a few minutes, just staring at the front door, trying to collect myself. When I finally walked inside, I found her sitting at the kitchen table. She looked different, tired, thinner, her eyes red like she hadn't slept in days. She glanced up when I walked in but didn't say anything. I sat down across from her, waiting for her to speak. For a long time, we just sat there in silence, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. She fidgeted with her hands, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. I noticed it was still on, and for some reason, that pissed me off more than anything. I'm sorry, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't respond. I just stared at her, waiting for more. I know that doesn't mean anything now, she continued, her eyes flickering up to meet mine for a brief moment before darting away again. But I am. I'm so sorry for what I did. For everything. I leaned back in the chair, crossing my arms over my chest. What exactly are you sorry for, Laura? For screwing my best friend? For lying to me for months? Or are you just sorry you got caught? She winced, like the words physically hurt her. I'm sorry for all of it. I never meant for it to get this far. Well, it did. So, what now? She wiped at her eyes, sniffing softly. I don't know. I don't know what to do. I just want to fix this. There's no fixing this, I said coldly. You think you can just say sorry and make it all go away? That's not how it works, Laura. I know, she whispered. But I need you to know that I never wanted to hurt you. I never meant for any of this to happen. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. Then why did you do it? She stared down at her hands, twisting the ring again. I don't know. I was unhappy. I felt like we were drifting apart, like you didn't see me anymore. So, you decided to screw Steve? She flinched again, wiping at her eyes. No, I didn't decide anything. It just happened. We got close, and I made a mistake. I shook my head, disgusted. You didn't make a mistake, Laura. You made a choice. Over and over again. You chose him. You chose to lie to me. You chose to break our marriage. She started crying again, but I didn't feel anything. Not anger, not pity, just nothing. I watched her cry for a few minutes before speaking again. So, what do you want, Laura? Why did you ask me to come here? She wiped at her eyes, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I don't know. I don't want to lose you. I don't want our marriage to end like this. I stared at her, the words our marriage hanging in the air like they meant something. But they didn't. Not anymore. There is no our marriage, I said finally, my voice cold. You killed it. Her head dropped into her hands, and she cried harder, her shoulders shaking violently. I stood up, pushing my chair back, and walked toward the door. I couldn't stay here any longer. There was nothing left to say. As I reached the door, she called out, her voice breaking. Jake, please. Don't go. We can figure this out. I turned back to look at her one last time, her face buried in her hands, her body hunched over like she was collapsing in on herself. There's nothing to figure out, I said quietly. We're done. And with that, I walked out of the house, out of the life we'd built together, and didn't look back. Walking out of that house felt final in a way I didn't expect. There wasn't any dramatic music playing in my head, no moment of clarity or peace, just this sense of being done. Completely done. It was like flipping a switch. 1 second I was part of a marriage, part of a life we'd built together, and the next, I was on my own. I didn't look back. There wasn't anything to look back at. The drive back to my mom's place was quiet. The streets were mostly empty, a few cars here and there, but it was late enough that the world felt like it had gone to sleep. It felt strange, like I was floating through a life that wasn't mine. I turned on the radio, but it just filled the car with noise. Nothing to drown out what had just happened. I had told her it was over. Really over. And I knew, sitting there in the silence, that I meant it. When I got to my mom's, the house was dark. I parked out front and just sat there for a minute, staring at the front door. The last few weeks had been a blur, packing up my stuff, moving out, tearing Laura's life apart the way she had torn mine. But now, in this quiet moment, I realized I had no idea what came next. I went inside and sat down on the couch. The house was still, the air thick with the kind of calm you only get in the middle of the night. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling, trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. I had spent 9 years building a life with Laura, and in a few weeks, it had all been dismantled. I thought back to when we first met, back when everything was new and exciting. We used to stay up late talking about everything, life, our dreams, stupid stuff that didn't matter. I remembered the first time I saw her laugh, that full-body kind of laugh where she'd throw her head back and lose herself in the moment. I remembered how, back then, I thought I'd never want anyone else. That she was it for me. But the thing about memories is, they get blurry when reality smacks you in the face. You start wondering if you'd missed something along the way, if maybe those moments weren't as perfect as you thought they were. I kept asking myself if I'd been blind, if the signs were there all along and I just didn't want to see them. Was it my fault? Had I been too wrapped up in work, in the day-to-day grind, to notice that Laura was slipping away? Or was she always going to do this, no matter what I did? I'd never know. That was the worst part. There wouldn't be a neat explanation that tied everything together. There wouldn't be some grand reason for why she cheated, why she lied. It just happened, and now I had to live with it. I grabbed my phone, half expecting to see more missed calls or texts from Laura, but there was nothing. I wasn't surprised. After what I said, I figured she'd probably give me some space before trying again. She'd have to try, though. I knew that much. She wouldn't just let it go, not without some last-ditch effort to salvage what was left of us. But it didn't matter. I wasn't going back. The next few days passed in a weird, slow-motion kind of way. I went through the motions, waking up, going to work, coming home to my mom's house, but it all felt detached, like I was watching someone else live my life. I didn't hear from Laura, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to. I kept waiting for that moment when I'd feel some kind of relief, some sense of freedom or closure, but it never came. Tom checked in with me every now and then, asking if I needed anything, if I was okay. I'd tell him I was fine, that I was dealing with it. But the truth was, I wasn't dealing with anything. I was just existing, passing the time, waiting for something to click into place. One night, a couple of weeks later, I found myself sitting on the porch, staring out at the quiet street. It was late again, and the air had that cool, crisp feel that only comes at the end of summer. I hadn't thought about Laura all day, and for a second, I let myself believe that maybe I was starting to move on. But then I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw her name on the screen. I stared at it for a moment, debating whether to answer. I knew what this was going to be, her trying to reach out, trying to pull me back in. She'd be calm at first, maybe even apologetic, but then she'd start pushing, trying to get me to meet up, to talk, to give her one more chance. I wasn't in the mood. But for some reason, I answered anyway. Jake? Her voice was soft, careful, like she didn't want to set me off. Yeah, I said, keeping my tone flat. Can we talk? She asked, her voice shaking a little. Just talk. Please. I let out a long breath. I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to hear more apologies, more excuses. But maybe I needed to hear her one last time, just to make sure there was no doubt in my mind. Fine, I said. What do you want? She was quiet for a second, probably trying to figure out where to start. I don't know how we got here, she said finally. I don't know how I let things get so bad. I didn't say anything. What was there to say? I miss you, she whispered. I miss us. I miss everything. I closed my eyes, letting the words wash over me. There was a time when hearing her say that would have made me crumble, would have made me want to fix things, to make everything go back to how it was. But now, it just felt like empty words. We can't go back, Laura, I said quietly. You know that. I know, she said, her voice breaking. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I don't know how to move on without you. That's not my problem anymore. There was a long pause, and I could hear her trying to steady her breathing. Is there really no way to fix this? No way to start over? I thought about it. I really did. I thought about what it would be like to try and rebuild what we had, to forgive her, to pretend like we could ever go back to the way things were. But that was just it, we couldn't. Even if I wanted to, I wouldn't be able to forget what she did. No, I said finally, my voice firm. We're done. She let out a soft sob, and for a second, I almost felt bad. Almost. But then I remembered everything, Steve, the lies, the way she'd looked at me that night in the kitchen, like she was trying to come up with some story to cover her tracks. We'll figure out the divorce, I said, trying to end the conversation. I'll have my lawyer contact you. Jake, please. I'm done, Laura, I said, cutting her off. It's over. And this time, I meant it. In the days that followed, I started making plans. I filed for divorce, got my own place, and slowly began piecing my life back together. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't fast, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was moving forward. The hardest part was telling the kids. They were still young, too young to really understand what had happened, but I did my best to explain it in a way that wouldn't scar them for life. Laura and I agreed to joint custody, and as painful as it was, we managed to keep things civil for their sake. Every now and then, I'd catch myself thinking about what could have been, about the life we'd had before everything fell apart. But those moments didn't last long. I'd remind myself that I deserved better than what Laura had given me, that I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life cleaning up her mess. One night, as I sat in my new apartment, surrounded by the quiet of a life that was mine again, I realized something. For the first time since this whole thing started, I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel sad, either. I just felt done. I had spent so much time consumed by Laura's betrayal, by the anger, the hurt, the need for revenge, that I hadn't realized how much space it was taking up in my head. But now, sitting there in the silence, I realized I had finally let it go. I didn't know what was next for me. I didn't have some grand plan for the future, didn't have a timeline for when I'd start dating again, or when I'd feel normal. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't worried about it. I was free. And that was enough.